Hello and welcome to Border Raiders, the place for your fix of all things outdoors and wild camping. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Wild Country Blizzard 2 by Terra Nova. So let's jump straight into the basic specs before moving on to take a look at how to pitch it correctly, and then we'll walk through the pros and cons of the tent as well as any little quirks it might have. So the basic specs, so it is a 2-person, 4-season tunnel tent design. It weighs in at 2.3 kilograms. It has a fly sheet hydrostatic head of 4,000 millimeters, so more than enough for rainy and winter conditions. The poles come in at 8.5 millimeters, so respectable, and it sleeps 2 people. Now we're going to get into some of these features as we walk through the tent. We're going to consider, is it really a 2-person tent, and are the features on this tent worthy of the 4-season name? So first things first, let's take a look at the actual unit itself and the bag. So as you can see, it has a great compression strap design which opens with these 2 buckles and this little drawstring. From there, as you can see, it opens really nice and wide. It has a fantastic dust cover that comes over the top, and the opening, like I said, it opens really wide. This makes it really easy to pack and super convenient, especially if the conditions are against you and you just need to bundle the tent into the pack. So inside the bag you obviously get the tent, then you get pegs and poles. Now let's take a look at these. So the pegs inside, you get 12 of these alloy V-stake pegs. Nothing fancy, nothing special, no draw cord to consider that. You can, however, add your own with this little hole that's available. And onto the poles, you get 3 8.5 millimeter. As you can see, they are colour coordinated, and they do come in different lengths. You also get a handy little splint sleeve just to slide over any sections that might become damaged. So now we're going to jump into pitching the tent. We're going to take a look at sort of the best practices as well as any little quirks that the tent might have when you come to pitching it. So when it comes to tunnel tents, there's a little bit of a debate whether you should pitch vestibule facing into the wind or the back into the wind. A lot of premium brands are now advocating that you pitch the porch into the wind. So on the premise that we're going to be facing into the wind, we're going to start by pegging out the front of the tent. We're going to pop 2 pegs in, and that means as the wind's blowing that way, the tent's not going to be coming back and hitting ourselves. Once I've done the front 2, I'm then going to go round to the back and very loosely, not putting too much tension on, I'm just going to pull the tent out to give it its rough shape. So now the tent's all laid out, we're going to move on to getting the poles in. As you can see, the poles in this case, some of them are slightly pre-bent. Now a really fantastic feature on this, and one that takes any guesswork out of it, is the fact that the pole and the sleeve are colour coordinated. So from there it makes it really easy. As you work your way through, just make sure you're jiggling it to try and stop any sort of catching. Now, the way I tend to pitch this is that I feed them through the poles until I can see the end just pop out the sleeve, and I don't push it any further than that. I go through and I do the next one. Finally, make your way to the last remaining pole. From there, I then work my way forward and feed the pole into the grommet. So now the spine of the tent's in and it's just ready to be popped up. As you can see, we're going to start by pushing the pole through. Now you'll see there is a little bit of effort involved at times, especially I've found on this front pole. The tension is quite high and the tolerances are quite fine. Now in windy conditions it can be a bit of a challenge, and I've experienced that on a number of occasions now. So consider that when you're using the front pole. If you are really struggling, you may find that you need to slacken the front peg off. In exceptional cases, you may need to unpeg it altogether So once we pitch the front, again, starting from where the wind's prevailing from, we're going to work our way back. And you'll often find that this middle one, as you can see, goes in a lot easier, as does the back. So as you can see, if you follow that method by pegging the front, pegging the back, and then working your way across the poles, straight off the bat, it gives you an absolutely excellent pitch. When you look at the sturdiness of the tent, you can see, for your first effort, with no adjustments, that is a solid pitch. So the next step is getting your guys pegged. As always, follow the principle long and low. And in this case, when it comes to the front of the tent, you're going to want to slightly pull it out to the side and forward, so that any wind that is hitting the tent from the front is being absorbed by these guys. When it comes to the middle section, you're going to come out to the side, and on this occasion you're going to come back somewhat, so that middle panel is being pulled and stretched, giving it a nice bit of rigidity. And when it comes to the back, you're going to come out to the side, and again you're going to move out to the back. The back of the tent also features a guy. Simply come back, peg that, make it nice and taut, and what you'll find, this back as well as the front guy lines are essential in giving the tent its sort of strength running through the length of the tent. If you get this nice and tight, it really does have such a massive impact on how strong this tent is. So finally, the front guy and the peg. Now, this is the 12th and final peg. What you'll notice is that that does not cover all the pegging points on the tent. We still have a further 2 at the front of the tent, as well as a pegging point at each side where the pole meets the grommet. So that's 2 at the front and 3 down the sides. So there's another 8 pegs that this tent can take. So bear that in mind. You aren't provided with enough pegs for every pegging point. However, what I would say is that at this point, the tent does work. You're just not getting the strongest possible version of the tent. So the next thing I want to talk about, and one that you've probably recognised as quite unique straight away, is the front guy line on the Blizzard 2. Now, when you get the tent, this guy line is simply attached and tied on. When it's guyed out, great, it offers exceptional strength, but as you can imagine, it does impede the access in and out of the tent. If the weather's really nice, again, you're not going to want to use this. You would otherwise tie it up and it'd just dangle there in the way, which can become annoying. A great mod that I sort of made on this tent very early was to take the guy line off and attach a carabiner. And what this allows, if you slacken this off, you can leave it in place attached to the peg. It just means that it comes off easy and you can just leave that on the ground. Therefore you can get in and out of the tent nice and easy. If the wind was to pick up, you simply attach, simply take up the slack, and you're good to go. Whilst we're on this mod, another great feature when it comes to packing away the tent is if you take this off, you can either leave it in place, or if you know you're going in better weather, another really handy storage place is just to stick it on one of these side O-rings. So now let's take a quick look at the exterior, the materials, the features and the quality. The outer fly sheet is made of a 20D ripstop nylon that has a 4000mm hydrostatic head. The quality and the finishing on the tent, in my experience, is good for a wild country tent. So what I found after pitching this tent and after using the Wild Country Helm 2 is that this feels a step up in class from some of the more really entry level and budget tents by Wild Country by Terra Nova. This to me feels like a tent that is just getting on to that sort of level and standard before it crosses over to become the more premium brand that is Terra Nova. And what I mean by materials and quality of the tent is things like this. So when we come to the guy line, it's nice and thick, it must be about 3mm. You then come on to a nice hefty plastic O-ring, then leads on to this nice and thick quality sort of cord and tie out point to the tent. So with it being a 4-season tent, the ground sheet comes virtually all the way down to the ground. So it's a little bit hard to tell in this instance because the grass is being trimmed back. But when you're out and you're on a wild camp and the grass isn't, generally the grass will cover this. So whilst we're on the exterior, let's just quickly talk about the structure of the tent, its design principles and how it performs. So as you can see, it's a tunnel tent. At the moment, tunnel tents are making a little bit of a resurgence, you could say. I think for a long time they were viewed as probably inherently a little bit weaker than some of your semi-geodesic shapes with plenty of crossing poles. However, when you pitch a tunnel tent correctly, especially if it's facing into the wind, it's extremely strong across the length of the tent. Where it does probably fall down somewhat is across its width. There's a little bit of flex within the tent. However, again, when you pitch a tunnel tent correctly, they can often still take a fair amount of wind, and that flex that you find in a tent allows the wind to roll over. So now let's move on to the door and the vestibule on this tent. The door on this tent has got two sides. It's got some really great aspects to it and some poor aspects, you could say. The first thing you're going to notice is this storm flap. This runs down each side of the tent and it's held in place by two Velcro straps. And there's a few ways that you can configure and open this door. The first one, and the most obvious, is simply to pop the Velcro straps back, come round and open it as you would with your standard door. From there, you're going to roll the door back, and on the right hand side, you're going to find these two elasticated toggles. When the door's tied back like this, it's really solid and it won't come undone, so that's great. Now on the other side, you'll also find a zip, and what that's going to allow you to do is, if you wish, you can unzip from the bottom for a little bit more ventilation should you be cooking. Also at the top of the door, there are two further zips, which is going to allow you to open that also. And as you can see, if it's a rainy day and you're cooking on the inside of the tent and you want a bit of ventilation, or you want to look out of the tent, this is a really good option for that. So one thing you have to note about this door, and in my experience I've found, is that these toggles at times can be prone to snagging. You know, if you haven't always got two hands available and you forget they're there, you will find that it catches on this side with these toggles, so just consider that. So now, while we're on the subject of the door, let's talk about the entry and exit into this tent, because it is going to be a make or break for certain people. What you can probably notice is that it is a very low profile door. Getting in and out of the tent, it's not the easiest in my experience when compared to other tents. So as you can see, it is low, and it means that you've got to get down really nice and low to get in, and it is shallow. Getting out, same affair. You know, it's a really tight affair. When you add on top of that the fact that this guy line might be out, and this is where this modification with the carabiner becomes essential in my opinion. If this is in place, as you can see, it means that you've obviously got to approach the tent, you've got to try and work your way under and get in. Now okay, it's not the end of the world, but for people with poor mobility, it is going to be a deal breaker in my opinion. With the carabiner modification, it just means that you can plop that off, throw it out the way and get out a whole lot easier than if it was to come attached and tied on like it does when you buy the tent. So when it comes to the vestibule on the tent, if you're using it for one person with gear, in my experience it works perfectly fine. There's just enough space on either side to store a bag or your cooking equipment, your boots. However, when I've used this for two people, both with their own individual kit, I've found it to be a real struggle. In fact, on occasion, we've had to leave equipment such as bags and cooking equipment outside of the tent. There just isn't enough space in this vestibule to facilitate two people with two sets of kit and equipment. So consider that. If you're someone who camps as a pair, you might struggle to get all your kit inside of this tent. So now let's take a look at the interior of the tent as well as some of its features. The first thing when it comes to the interior of this tent, before we head in, is to take a look at the space between the inner and the outer itself. As you can see, it's held in place by these easy toggle systems, as well as these clips in the corner. This makes it really easy should you need to take it out on multi-day trips where it might be raining and you want to store the inner and the outer separately. The room that you can see between the inner and the outer means that ventilation is fantastic. It lets the air blow through the tent, wicking away any moisture and condensation. It also means that when it rains and the outer gets wet, you won't find the outer sticking to the inner. So when it comes to the materials of the inner tent, it's made from 68D ripstop. Now that is really tough, strong and durable. I believe it's made and only available in this white colour, which apparently helps with the carbon emissions that go into making this tent. So the majority of the inner is made of this solid fabric that runs all the way round, and as you can see on the door, about 3/4 up, it's made of this very small section of no-seam mesh. There isn't any option to have this solid all the way up. It is stuck in this configuration. However, in my experience, I've found that the tent is nice and warm, and it does mean that the condensation and the moisture in the tent is constantly managed without you having to do anything. So now taking a look at the bathtub floor, it has a hydrostatic head of 5,000 millimeters, and when you take a look around the edge of the tent, you know, it's not the deepest of bathtub floors, it's also not the shallowest. In my experience, it's done a job perfectly fine. So the door is a simple circular design with a two-way zip. You're going to simply roll the door back, and what you'll find once you roll the door back, it has this handy little storage pouch just behind the door that it can fall into. So the first thing you're going to notice once you actually get inside the tent is the head height. As you can see, I'm currently not sat on any sort of foam pad, insulated pad or air pad, and my head is still touching the top. Now, admittedly, I can still sit up without too much resistance, and the inner still isn't touching the outer flight sheet. However, what I would say is that it does encourage you to slouch over time. It also means that on those long winter nights, if you're someone who likes to sit up in your tent, you know, you want to be able to drink without being impeded, you're probably not going to be able to do that on this tent. So that is going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. On the flip side of that, what I would say is that it is still manageable. It's not like you're completely hunched over. Like I said, you can still sit up, and the low profile is probably a consequence of the designers trying to make it a little bit more wind resistant. So in addition to the head height, let's talk about the space in general in this tent. What you'll find is that you are meant to sleep head first, so your head is meant to sleep towards the door end. The reason for this is that it's wider across the width where your shoulders and your hips are, whilst it tapers towards the foot end of the tent. If you're going to have two regular pads that aren't tapered in this tent, you're going to find towards the foot end you're going to have a bit of a problem, and the pads are going to overlap. If you have two wide pads in this tent, I think you are going to struggle. Now, in my experience when camping with two people inside this tent, it is really, really cramped. I wouldn't say this is a true two-person tent. For one person with kit, it's perfect. It is a fantastic size, notwithstanding the headroom. Now, one of the absolute outstanding features on this tent, and it's probably the best tent I've ever come across for it, and that is the storage in the pockets on this tent. It is fantastic. You have these two really large squared off pockets immediately on either side of the door as you get in, and you also have them on either side where your hips would rest. So that's 4 really large pockets, and they are an absolute joy. They can store so much kit, nothing falls out, and it makes you wonder why all manufacturers can't make pockets like this on a tent. You'll also find there are 2 hooks on this tent. You've got one again running across the centre line where your hips would lay, as well as one hanging just above the door. It means that you can put either 2 lanterns on. It also allows you, if you'd like, to run a washing line, which I have done on a number of occasions. So that's a really handy, versatile little feature. Now let's talk about the second absolutely fantastic feature about this tent. It is the ventilation and the way it seems to handle and manage condensation and moisture. So as I said, you have the front door which can be cracked from the top. With the hood, it just means that you can open the door and allow airflow to come in through the front door without any water getting in. And at the back of the tent, you can also see the small mesh panel, and that leads through to the vent that is hidden underneath the hood at the back of the tent. Now, after plenty of use in this tent in a different manner of conditions, whether that be hot, humid summer nights, or even on those cool and sort of mist and claggy winter evenings, I've found that whenever I woke up in the morning in this tent, there isn't any moisture at all. Now, I can't obviously say that you'll have that experience on every occasion, but from me, I've used this tent enough now to know it handles moisture and condensation exceptionally well. So if you're someone who, you know, is really affected by that, and you're someone who likes a dry sleeping environment, then this might be a fantastic option for yourself. And just while we're on ventilation, doesn't seem to lose any heat or sacrifice any warmth. This solid panel that you have all round the tent means it's a nice and snug, warm environment, especially on those winter evenings. So, thank you for watching. Hope you found some value in the video. If you did, please do consider liking and subscribing and hitting the bell notification. It means that you get all the content you want, and it really does help support and grow the channel. So thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one.